The 2020 NBA Finals are set. With the Los Angeles Lakers set to face the Miami Heat, both teams finished their opponents with relative ease, with the Lakers finishing every series with 4-1 wins, and the Heat just finishing off the Celtics in 6. In this breakdown, we are going to look at the X's and O's, the individual matchups and the team matchups, and how both teams will try to attack the other's weaknesses. My name is Coach Gibson Pyper. You can follow me on Twitter at HalfCourtHoops. I also have an extended breakdown of the NBA Finals preview with both teams' full playbooks, special situations, and specific game details for Coach's Cut subscribers. Link is in the description below. I want to start off talking about the player matchups and what to focus on when thinking about who is guarding who. The biggest question for the Lakers is not playing AD at the 5, but how long they can go playing a big against the Heat. JaVale McGee and Dwight Howard bring some value to their rotations, but this specific matchup with Bam Adebayo and the Heat is going to be a difficult one. I don't think McGee will be able to stay on the floor in this series too much. The Heat's offensive attack specifically hurts what he can do on the defensive end, and asking him to defend all of their actions is probably unfair. I do think that Dwight Howard is an interesting case since we saw his impact last series versus Jokic. Of course, his offensive rebounding was huge in Game 4, but also his defensive pressure against Jokic did bother him and disrupted his vision when passing and causing some discomfort. This is something he might have success with against a player like Bam Adebayo. Now that is the positive a player like Dwight can bring to the lineup. This was offset primarily because every time an opponent attacks him, it's pretty much a guaranteed layup on the other end of the floor. Jokic and Murray found a lot of success, and the Nuggets specifically found ways to put him in ball screen and handoff defense going to their two-man game, and all I can think about is Dragic and Bam getting excited when they see Dwight on the floor on defense. In my opinion, I think Vogel and the Lakers will look to play a big in Game 1, then when the Heat find success against it, AD at the 5 will be the primary lineup the Lakers use. Now for the Heat, the biggest priority would be keep Bam on AD and one of Crowder, Butler, Iguodala on LeBron. Now Bam on AD is a good matchup for the Heat. He's their best defender, and his length and athleticism has a chance to slow AD down. Now when we say slow AD down, we mean maybe give him some problems, not stop him completely. Guarding LeBron with Crowder or Iguodala is probably the best the Heat can do, although LeBron will have the advantage against any of those players. The interesting part will be if the Lakers do start big, like I think they will, is now it leaves a weird matchup choice for them. Do they put Bam on the big and have Crowder on AD and Butler on LeBron? That seems like a huge advantage for the Lakers and could be a factor of the Lakers staying with the big on the floor. Do the Heat put Butler on McGee or Howard and then put Bam onto AD and Crowder on LeBron? That would be my first choice, although worrying about offensive rebounding would likely sway a coach to avoid this matchup. Now when it comes to guards, the only matchup that I would be concerned with is who is guarding Dragic. As we saw versus smaller guards, Dragic is able to have his way one-on-one, attacking downhill and scoring easily over players like Kemba, and in ball screen they are typically going to get caught on screens. Putting KCP on Dragic seems like the logical move to start, but with all of the switching we will see Green, Caruso, and others matched up against him as well. Now, since in the playoffs both teams switch their guards all the time, avoiding the mismatch on players like Butler and Dragic will be key for the Lakers, and avoiding the mismatch of a guard on LeBron will be important for the Heat. I want to dive into the X's and O's and talk about what the Heat and Lakers will run on offense and what they'll do on defense to try to counter that, and look at some examples of how they may have defended some actions like that before. When we do this deep dive, it's important to remember that this is based off just watching film and interpreting what a team is trying to do. Without being in the film room, the coaches' meetings, and knowing the actual why behind all of these concepts and ideas, it can lead to some misinterpretation of what the team was told to do or what their intent always is. So just keep that in mind as we go through this. This is just our observations. Now let's dive into one of my favorite offenses to watch, the Miami Heat. The biggest advantage the Miami Heat will have over pretty much any opponent is their offensive spacing. Considering every player on the court for them is a threat from three-point range, with the weakest being Jimmy Butler, who apparently decided that this postseason it was time to make his threes, now shooting 44% compared to a terrible 25% in the regular season. Small sample size, of course, but that sticks in a coach's brain and at least be noted on the scouting report. Of course, Bam doesn't shoot threes, but he benefits from the other 4 players being great three-point shooters. The Heat can put out lineups that shoot 46, 45, 40, and 37% three-point shooters around Bam Adebayo, with Dragic and even Hero not operating out of the ball screen for shot creation. It just asks a lot of questions of the team defensively, and the Lakers have to be ready to defend all of these actions and all these three-point shooters. Now let's talk about how they kind of create this spacing and use Bam Adebayo as the engine of their offense. The Heat get the ball to Bam in 4 main spots: the middle of the floor, the elbow, the pistol action, and the post. These 4 spots are where he kind of operates and they kind of run all their main offensive actions out of. In the middle of the floor, there are 2 ways they can get him the ball. He can either bring the ball up the court and what I call a bust out after rebounds, creating a 5-out look on offense, or the point guard or guard can bring the ball up the floor, pass it to Bam in the middle of the floor, and that creates a 5-out look on offense as well. I call this setup delay, so delay action. This is a common action that most NBA teams will run on offense. The Heat will run kind of 4 to 5 main actions out of all of these formations, but they love to initially hit Bam in the middle of the floor and then have the players on the wings screen down for the players in the corners. This pin down action means Bam can choose either side of the floor and go into a dribble handoff with the player in the corner. The action I call this Chicago is this pin down into a dribble handoff, and what it does is this creates shake or single tag action. This shake action forces the player on the wing here to choose to defend Bam on the roll or the shooter on the wing. And since the Heat have great shooting, more often than not, Bam is open on the roll. Now, it is rare in the playoffs that you get the first option of anything, but the initial pin down is an option that they will look to maybe get shooters open. So after passing to the middle and then screening down for a shooter in the corner, an option to get the shooter open is there. Generally speaking, that's not going to be there, but what this does, it actually opens up this slip counter versus a team that likes to switch. So if the Lakers are going to switch this action, the slip could be there on this quick pin down to start. One of my favorite options out of the delay series or 5-out is the flare or back screen option. Flare or back screen are 2 different types of screens, but the way the Heat set the flare screen actually can turn into a back screen. So this is primarily an action after the ball gets to Bam in the middle, where the player in the corner is going to set a flare screen for the player who passed the ball to initiate the offense. This can be a flare for a 3, as we can see here in this example for Dragic, or it can turn into the back screen that I mentioned. Now, the reason this would turn into a back screen is when the defense is trying not to switch this action and tries to chase over the top of the flare screen, allowing the player coming off the flare screen to reverse curl it to the basket, kind of turning it into a back screen. One of the options off of this is to slip the flare action. Although the Heat have not gotten this look so far in the postseason, this could be a look they might try to go to if the Lakers are going to switch every screen with their smaller lineups. Now, with all this shooting, cutting, screening, and playing off the ball and playing off of Bam, this opens up the floor, typically allowing Bam to attack downhill while the other 4 players are occupied with this screening action. This typically allows Bam to have the advantage attacking one-on-one. However, the Lakers can counter this with Anthony Davis at the 5, possibly the one player who could defend Bam and keep him in front of him and recover with length. Now let's move into how the Lakers have defended this action before. Now keep in mind that we aren't looking at the Heat running them versus the Lakers. This is the Lakers defending them. And in the finals, it'll probably look a little bit different, but it's kind of good to note how they initially defend these actions, since this is how the Heat staff will kind of notice it on film and maybe try to prepare for it. I've only seen the Lakers defend this Chicago action a handful of times. As we can see here, they switch the initial pin down or flare option on the first side, not allowing any advantage on that side. Then on the Chicago action, we see Howard in the game. The Lakers switch the first screen. Then as this turns basically into a ball screen, we see CJ drive Howard downhill and make the layup. The primary film we have on them defending the delay action is last series versus the Nuggets. The main way they defended this was to switch most of the handoff and 2-man game that the Nuggets were running, primarily with Jokic and Murray. This will probably be slightly different if they switch onto Bam, since the primary reason the Lakers were switching this action was to take away the threat of the pick and pop of Jokic. Now, since Bam is not a pick and pop option, switching a guard onto him, they will have to worry about him going down into the post and taking advantage of the smaller Laker guards, or switching out one of their bigs onto Dragic and Dragic isolating with success. The other 3 main areas that I mentioned before that the Heat use Bam is the elbow, the post, and what the Heat and Spoelstra call pistol action, or having Bam on the wing, throwing the ball ahead to him, and then getting a handoff back, or Bam can keep it. Out of these areas, they run the basic actions of split cuts, handoff, staggers, and zoom actions, always putting pressure on the defense by attacking and cutting continuously. A set they run often is to pass the ball to Bam at the elbow, then have 2 to 3 players bunched up on the opposite side and allow their high IQ players to read the game. Now, if you pressure or try to top block their shooters and deny them, they can hit you with the backdoor cut. If you decide that you want to try and switch this action, then the opportunity for slips to the rim for layups will be there. If you stay on the low side, now you're vulnerable to their handoff game, and that allows Bam to hand off to a shooting threat that opens up the 3-point shot as well as the roll. Now let's say it's a perfect defensive possession that you defend well and execute your coverages, stop the dribble handoff. You can now take a breath knowing you did a great job guarding their initial action. The problem is Robinson will then fire it right back to Bam and come off a quick dribble handoff, catching the defense asleep, and then you get burned for a 3. The amount of defensive focus you have to defend this zoom action becomes nightmarish. Or if you decide you even want to switch this handoff action, maybe going small with LeBron or AD at the 5. Now Bam is going to fake this dribble handoff and keep it, turning this action into a layup or getting downhill to drive and kick and make great decisions. I do expect the Lakers to switch all of the off-ball actions as much as possible, and then try to run shooters off the 3-point line, trying to force them to play into take a dribble or attack the basket, or maybe take the roll man out and try to take Bam out of the possessions. But it's extremely hard to guard all of these actions. It's not only the cutting actions that you have to actually worry about, though. The ball screens the Heat run also put a ton of pressure and put the defense in tough scenarios. When the Heat are not running any of their sets or actions involving Bam directly, they will typically go to their 21 chase action, something that, again, most teams in the NBA run, starting off with the Phoenix Suns and D'Antoni in 2007, ran this action all the time. This starts off with a guard setting a step-up screen for another guard on the wing, then coming off a flare screen from the big at the top of the key. The options off this first screen are to turn the corner, try and score quickly, and then look for the player off the flare screen if you can't turn the corner. Since most NBA teams switch this first ball screen like for like, the play will typically then flow into a side ball screen for the point guard and the big. This is normally Dragic and Bam, one of the best ball screen combos in the NBA, with all of the other players spaced on the weak side. Dragic can then turn the corner and look to finish the layup. If the big helps and defends the rim, Dragic will find Bam on the roll to the rim, and since that side of the floor is empty, there's no help there. If a player on the weak side helps on the drive, then it's an easy kick out to a great 3-point shooter. And finally, the last option, if the defense switches on Dragic, he can back it out, nash it out, or escape to the 3-point line and have the advantage in ISO situations, or find Bam posting up a guard to look to try and score. The Heat also run a double ball screen with 2 main variations that I call empty and low. The normal action is to have the low option where 2 players are setting the ball screen for the ball handler. Typically is going to be Goran Dragic. The first one is going to be a guard setting the ball screen and then Bam as a second ball screener. Now instead of a normal double ball screen, Bam is lower and toward the nail. So if you're in drop coverage, like the Lakers would run when they have a big in the game, it is a simple pull-up read for Dragic, but there's also an easy turn the corner for the guard, and then it creates a harder recovery to the roll man with Bam sprinting to the rim. Now the empty option is to have the same exact setup, a double ball screen, but this time with one side of the floor empty. So when the ball handler comes off of this, it creates a longer shake decision since the first screener just has to hold his position on the wing and his defender has to stay with him or help on the roll. This causes a lot of problems for the defense because now the guard can come off knowing that all he has to do is make a simple read on the ball screen. Defending this type of action, especially the empty action, the Lakers have typically gone to ice defense or forcing the player away from the ball screen. So the guard will jump above the ball screen, the big will be lower, and they try to force the ball to the sideline. If you want to learn more about ice, I did a breakdown in my NBA playoffs preview. But what this does is it allows them a little bit vulnerable to baseline drives. So if Dragic were to turn the corner or to get downhill here, it's basically a guard attacking a big, and the big defender will have to be able to help on the drive in ice coverage, and you can be vulnerable to baseline drifts and create an advantage that way. But typically the Lakers will ice this ball screen option. In sideline out of bounds scenarios, the Heat will run their normal back screen into a dribble handoff, but with the first entry always being a pass to Bam at the elbow typically, they have the ability to run any of their normal handoff cutting game as well. The normal back screen and dribble handoff is that it's a back screen into a dribble handoff. The player at the closest block will set a back screen for the inbounder and then come off a dribble handoff from Bam. Now in these scenarios, the Heat have the option to post up Butler versus switch on a smaller defender, turn this action into Chicago action in a couple different ways. The first way is the player who would be setting the original back screen to turn the angle of the screen and kind of screen the inbounder and have the inbounder come off of that dribble handoff. The other way is to have the inbounder step in and set the little quick pin down for a handoff for the player on the block, going into Chicago action that way. Now, having multiple ways to get into these options make it very difficult to prepare for, since you can note on the scouting report, you can know the play call, you can tell them what's going to happen, and the Heat can still counter it by making smarter reads. A good example of this is from game 1 with Kemba trying to avoid the switch when the Heat go to their backscreen dribble handoff, sideline out of bounds. Here is the video breakdown of that now. This is one of my favorite possessions of the game. Here we see Hero telling Crowder to go set the screen. Crowder tells him to calm down, just loop around and pop out, so that way Crowder can go on the low side and set the back screen. Now the reason for this is because the Celtics put Kemba on Crowder, so they're trying to hide him there. Now Crowder becomes the back screener, Butler cuts inside, they don't want to switch this action, so Kemba gets caught on Butler, Tatum gets caught on Butler, and this leaves Crowder wide open for the 3 to put the Heat up 111 to 110. So now we just looked at Kemba guarding off the ball. Now he's guarding the inbounder on Jimmy Butler to switch this back screen action. Heat noticed this, and Hero clears up to the top and doesn't allow Brown and Kemba to switch this. However, the ball pressure stagnates a little bit of the offense. Smart and Kemba do a scram switch, and now we get Smart matched up on Butler. So the Celtics do a good job of avoiding this action and a good counter by the Heat. Random action in a ball screen, end of the clock, we get a contested 3. Good contest by the Celtics, end up getting the rebound going the other way. In baseline out of bounds situations, the Heat basically run 2 plays. The first is a basic post up for Bam. So they'll throw the ball into Bam, and then that triggers their cutting actions. It can go back into a dribble handoff, look to read off of it, and just kind of play their cutting game off of that. Or they can set a double screen for shooters. So you have 2 players setting the screen, and the shooters, Robinson and Hero, can cut off of it, looking for a catch and shoot scenario. But generally speaking, they're going to go to the post up for Bam out of it. Now I want to show you why the Miami Heat are the hardest team to guard in my opinion. Normally when teams run a set, let's say the Lakers are running a set. Here's an example of them running their option set. They run in this action after a timeout, looking to possibly get a player off of this stagger screen or the option to flip it back into a side ball screen. The set's defended pretty well, and with 10 seconds on the shot clock, they isolate LeBron at the elbow. He attacks, kicks out to shooters, makes an extra pass, who drive and dish it to Dwight, and the shot ends up getting blocked. To be clear, this is not bad offense. I just want to show the difference between the Lakers offense and then now the Heat offense. In this after timeout scenario, the Heat are going to set a cross screen for Dragic to catch the ball in the post. Robinson then cuts to the basket as a decoy action, then receives a down screen from Bam to come right back out to the wing looking for a shot. Jaylen Brown does a great job staying attached and denying Robinson stopping the set. Once he knows the set is not open and he is not open, Robinson fires the ball back to Bam in the middle of the floor quickly. Screens down for Dragic, then Dragic comes off the handoff from Bam, the Chicago action we looked at previously, and this leads right into a Bam lob dunk because no help on Robinson. The Heat offense never stops moving, never stops cutting, and even if you think you've stopped them, you cannot stop defending because they will make you pay. The biggest thing for the Lakers defense, a question we already looked at, is who's guarding Bam. If they start to go big, then guarding Bam can leave them vulnerable to these actions, as well as allowing Bam clear vision. Unless they use Howard against him, but then that can create an issue with Howard being the guy defending the ball screen out of position. Now, ultimately, at the end of games, I think AD at 5 is the solution to the problem, and even switching him against guards to use his length to deny easy scoring opportunities can be very effective. One of the problems that I foresee happening is if the Lakers start a big or have their normal lineup, which I'm not saying they should or shouldn't do, but I'm just kind of looking at what might happen, is that AD will be forced to chase guards from the Heat and switch off the ball, and maybe have to be involved in multiple handoff actions. And a huge advantage of having a player of AD's quality and how good he is it can take away all of these actions. But the problem is, if he can take away all these actions, his ability off the ball is not being utilized. Anthony Davis is an extremely long defender. He is a great athlete, and his ability to have deflections, steals, and wreak havoc, keeping him near the basket with rim protection, is important. Now, because of his ability to disrupt offenses, it's a catch-22 because you can have him switch onto all these guards and take away any of the scoring opportunities, but it also pulls him away from the basket, something we talked about in the Bam breakdown against the Celtics. So if he has to chase around players like Crowder, Butler, and Robinson, going to him at the 5 solves a lot of these issues. A hard thing about the Lakers and evaluating what their game plan might be is that the Miami Heat are completely different opponents than anything the Lakers have faced before. The Blazers had Dame and CJ, but once you stop Dame, the rest of the team didn't have the ability to hurt the Lakers. The Rockets presented problems, but always knowing what they were going to do by isoing Harden, taking it out of his hands by trapping him, and then eliminating the three-point shot, it became a relatively easy series. The Nuggets had Murray and Jokic, but were unable to capitalize of the switching scheme the Lakers deployed, and it was really those two with the off-ball cutting action to defend, and that is the extent of their threat offensively. All of them great players, but not difficult schemes to defend, and once you stop the main threats of those players, the teams were unable to make the Lakers pay, with a few exceptions here and there. Now, I tried to go back and watch the regular season matchups to see if we could learn anything from them, but honestly, it's a different world when going back and looking at those games. The Heat were starting Myers Leonard, and once playoff rotations are factored in, as well as the bubble, it just didn't seem applicable to this matchup. I will say the idea for the Lakers will be to switch the main cutting actions and try and turn Bam, Butler, and Dragic into ISO players and make them have to beat you one-on-one. That's what the overall game plan will probably be for the Lakers, but I'm really curious to see what they actually try and deploy. Now for the Lakers offense, the number one thing the Lakers do is turn their elite defense into offense by running in transition, and nobody does it better on misses but also makes. Running in transition and making it a priority means having the focus and also the will to run every possession. Once you score on the Lakers, you have to immediately transition back to defense, or they will make you pay with a quick inbounds, pass the ball up the floor, and scoring right back on you. The ability to run means scoring easier and not allowing the defense to get set up, something that I think will be extremely important against a Miami Heat team that will run zone defense, something that we'll touch on soon. Another reason the Lakers have been prioritizing transition offense is that their half-court offense has been middle of the pack all season, ending the regular season ranked 15th. As well as transition offense, offensive rebounding has been another way the Lakers mitigate their struggling half-court offense. Using their size and length to their advantage, crashing the glass has allowed the Lakers to get back 27% of their misses during the regular season, and that actually has increased to 29% during the playoffs. Going against the Heat's 4-guard lineups, as well as their second unit small ball lineups, the Lakers have a chance to punish the Heat on the offensive glass, like they have most teams this season. And in their 2 regular season matchups, the Lakers had a 32% and a 35% offensive rebound rate, even with the Heat playing big. So this is an area of focus the Miami Heat defense will need to prioritize. Now, using the post-up is a main offensive focus for the Lakers, considering the only team that posts up more than the Lakers is the 76ers. In the playoffs, the main post-up options are obviously AD and LeBron, and this is especially important for the NBA Finals. In the playoffs, when teams switch main actions and try and take away what you do on offense, normally this will force ISOs, ball screen, and post-ups. This is one of the reasons the Lakers can find success against teams taking advantage of their size and using the post-up to attack defenses when they switch. With the Heat playing the 4 guards like we talked about around Bam, there are multiple options for LeBron and AD to exploit out of the post. Now, the Heat typically do not trap the post, but shrinking the floor and not allowing any cutters out of the post-ups will be important into making the post players for the Lakers one-dimensional. The Lakers have great cutters off the ball, and when LeBron posts up, his ability to create out of the post can cause problems for defenses. So if the Heat can stay at home and avoid getting beat by cutters like Kuzma, Caruso, and AD off the ball, they will find success against Lakers post-ups. Let's look at some of the ways that the Lakers actually get the ball to AD and LeBron in the post. Now, when the Miami Heat shoot free throws, or any Lakers opponent shoot free throws, one thing you'll notice that AD is usually not on the block rebounding, but he's on the other end of the floor. After every free throw, the Lakers will look to throw the ball to AD in the post, and depending on how the defense plays it, they have a couple of different wrinkles. The first option is obviously to post up Anthony Davis. They try to run the ball up the court, throw it to him in the post, and get a quick score. Knowing that after a free throw, the post up for AD is coming, teams are countering this by denying or sitting on the high side of Anthony Davis. Although sitting on the high side does take away the initial post-up pass, Anthony Davis is great at the spin lob. So when he feels his defender on the high side, he will spin backdoor for a lob dunk. He has great chemistry with LeBron and Rondo, so if they even sense that his defender is on the high side, they'll throw the lob as soon as possible. And with the threat of the spin lob, this now forces the defender to play behind Anthony Davis and allows him to have the advantage to post up easier. Another option they have is to have Anthony Davis set a step-up ball screen for the point guard. I'm not sure if this is a read or a call that the Lakers have, but this is an option that is not something they're going to look for as much as their post-up for Anthony Davis, but they will go to this often if the defender is going to be sagging or if they try to really deny him, because if they try to deny him and the step-up is set, then it's going to allow the guard to get directly downhill for an easier layup. Now, after timeouts, the Lakers will look to run this quick hitting option to post up Anthony Davis. The play starts with LeBron passing to the wing and then setting a wedge screen for AD to cut to the basket. Now, this first action, the Lakers actually haven't scored off of this season, so this is just kind of the basic action to get the play started. LeBron afterwards will then lift up, catch the pass, and come off a ball screen. And as LeBron comes off the ball screen, the opposite guard will set a cross screen for Anthony Davis. Now, off this cross screen, Anthony Davis looks to either catch and shoot or maybe even get a quick attack off the dribble. Here he tries to draw a foul, ends up just missing the shot. Similar to the Heat baseline out of bounds, they will also look to post up LeBron. They won't run any main action off of this. They'll just kind of throw it to him in the post. They do it for Anthony Davis when Anthony Davis is at the 5, but for the most part, they're going to look to post up LeBron baseline out of bounds. They don't spend a whole lot of time running baseline out of bounds sets, maybe if it's an after timeout or a special situation. In the half court, the main way the Lakers get into their sets will be using the elbow. The players they use at the elbow are primarily LeBron and Rondo. Now, having those two handle the elbows keeps their best passers at the elbow and best decision makers. So the most common action out of the elbow is to pass to the elbow and set a pin down screen for Anthony Davis. The guard is the one usually setting a screen for AD, and the reason for this is having him set the pin down, for instance, Caruso, Rondo, KCP, it will not allow the defense to switch, since if they do switch, then AD will punish a smaller guard pretty easily on the switch. Another variation of this pin down is to have LeBron set the down screen for AD, and having Rondo handle the ball with LeBron setting the down screen for AD, this is now involving two of their best players on the court and their second best decision maker at the elbow in this pin down action. It also keeps the ball with their best players to score, so it's not having anybody else having to make decisions or handle the ball. After timeouts, they will use Rondo at the elbow, and they'll typically put Anthony Davis opposite. This will be the look to have Anthony Davis flash in the post for a duck-in for a deep paint seal and look to get a quick score. If the defense takes this quick score away, they'll eventually look to post him up if it's denied. In the Lakers' flow offense, they tend to keep things pretty basic, and it works for them. The first look they'll try to go to is if they use two bigs on the court or two players with Anthony Davis being involved, they'll set a stagger screen for a player in the corner. The stagger screen is looking to get players like Kuzma and KCP and maybe Green at times to come off looking for a shot off the stagger screen. If the player coming off of that screen is not open, they will cut to the basket or clear, and then AD will open up looking for a shot or attacking a closeout, or just have him, go maybe two-man game. Another action that they'll run is having the big, especially with AD at the 5, to set a wide pin down screen for the guard with the same reads out of it, catching and shooting. If the catch and shoot is not open, curl, cut to the basket, and then AD will open up. AD can look catch and shoot or throw it back into a ball screen for 2-man game. They kind of just let their players make plays and decisions in this flow offense with the stagger screen and the wide pin down screen kind of initiating that offense. Now, perhaps the most run set in the NBA is the Lakers' Hornstrong handoff. I've talked about it for a while this whole season, and it's probably been the most effective set for the Lakers by far, especially when Avery Bradley was there. Now, this is a set that Vogel actually has run for years now, going all the way back to when he was with the Pacers. I just first noticed it. The set starts off by passing the ball to the elbow, and then the point guard or the initiator, if it's LeBron, the point guard, and the opposite elbow, who would typically be Anthony Davis, will set a stagger screen for the guard in the opposite corner, who comes off the stagger screen and goes right into a dribble handoff. Now, off the dribble handoff, they'll look to turn the corner or find the roll man for a score or find shooters spotting up. Now, Vogel has been adding counters to this set, especially in the regular season. We can see them throw the ball to Anthony Davis, and then a guard set a under or an inverted ball screen for Anthony Davis, looking to get Anthony Davis downhill in ball screen action. And then in the playoffs, adding more counters, with the main one being a cross screen here for Anthony Davis. So after the dribble handoff, the player in the strong side corner is going to go into the cross screen for AD, looking for a quick score, or then eventually flowing into a post-up for Anthony Davis. Now, it would not be a Lakers offense breakdown without talking about LeBron and his ability to find the weakest defender on the other team, put them in ball screen and get a switch and keep the advantage and go to ISO or a post-up. Here we can see LeBron controlling space. He's going to bring CJ McCollum into the ball screen action, get a switch, or look to attack him off of the regular ball screen. When the help defense comes and collapses on him, he's able to find the open shooters for threes. Against the Rockets, we see LeBron going after Russell Westbrook. Back-to-back examples here of him just getting Russ on the switch, blowing by him twice for easy layups, and not being concerned about the Rockets' small ball help defense. And against the Nuggets, he went after both Jokic and MPJ, two of the weaker defenders that the Nuggets have. With his ability to drive as well as pass, it presents a lot of problems for the Heat's defense. Expect LeBron to try and attack Hero, Dragic, and Robinson as much as possible, especially down the stretch of games when it gets to late game situations. Now, this brings us to how the Heat would possibly counter that without going zone. The options when defending the late game ball screens with LeBron handling is to switch, hedge, or trap. Hedging is, hedging and recovering. Trapping is putting 2 on the ball. And switching is the most common option that teams will elect to do. Most teams just try to switch this action, and they just usually give them the switch, which infuriates me beyond belief. I go on rants all the time on podcasts about that because it's so frustrating to watch teams just give them the switch. I think the Heat will actually hedge this action. They'll try and avoid that mismatch, especially with Robinson and Hero. They were great at doing this so far these playoffs and kind of avoiding that mismatch, although it's helped that they have not faced a player of LeBron's stature just yet. The Heat's transition defense has not been great this year, including the postseason. I've talked about the issues with transition defense for my Celtics Raptors preview about the data with it, but essentially transition defense data is slightly flawed because if you stop the team in transition, but they score in your half court defense looks worse, but there's actually no credit given to transition defense. So you slow them down in transition, they score on your half court defense, and the data shows that your half court defense takes a hit, but you don't actually get anything for your transition defense. So the Heat ranking lower in transition defense is a bad sign. How do you get better at transition defense? Number 1, take care of the ball. Number 2, make shots. Now, obviously, you're not going to make every shot, but you can try to limit your live ball turnovers. Live ball turnovers kill transition defense. The Heat this year so far turned the ball over 14.8% of the time, basically in the middle of the pack. That's actually dropped to 13.8% of the time in the playoffs, but there's no real way to track live ball turnovers that I've found, at least in my kind of research. If you guys know of any tracking sites or anything that kind of tracks live ball turnovers and points off live ball turnovers, that would be fantastic. Now, the Lakers are turning teams over 16% of the time, so taking care of the ball is a must against a Lakers team that is pretty aggressive on and off the ball. They do a great job of disrupting teams' offenses with deflections and blocks. And so I'm looking forward to seeing how the Heat's offense can kind of limit their or enable their transition defense and limit the Lakers' transition offense. Now, the number one way that the Heat took the Celtics out of one of their biggest strengths, which is the ball screen, was to switch Bam onto the Celtics guards whenever they set a ball screen. The Celtics have Kemba Walker and Jason Tatum, who are two elite pick and roll scorers and playmakers. So switching the ball screen to take them out of that action was really impactful. Against the Lakers, their strengths on offense is AD and LeBron, and out of the post and out of those two playmaking, which we kind of talked about. But the need to switch the ball screen might be only against LeBron. But even then, it might be unnecessary because LeBron's biggest ball screen strength is downhill drives. He's a great playmaker, but he's not a great three-point shooter, and he hasn't been shooting the ball that well in the playoffs. It would be interesting to see how the Heat approach this, but I think the Heat will go back to their normal ball screen defense with Bam and a higher drop coverage, and then if that doesn't work, switch when necessary. Now, the ultimate question for the Heat's defense that I have is zone or no zone. I think they'll play zone. That's not really the question. The question comes is how much zone do they play? Against the Celtics, they played zone in every game, and that's ultimately why it helped them go on that ridiculous fourth quarter run in Game 6 and close out the series among winning other games. Now, a main reason they went to that zone is because the Celtics ranked 22nd in zone offense, so again, they weren't a great zone to begin with. But a reason that it's been so effective is it takes time off the shot clock by going 2-2-1 into the 2-3, and then length up top, and the activity of the zone tends to slow down direct passes and attacks. The problem that arises when playing the Lakers is they have Anthony Davis and LeBron James, particularly operating out of the high post. Now, a weakness of any zone is the high post, short corner, and offensive rebounding. And a weakness of the Heat zone in particular, when I looked at it and watched all the possessions, is the high post. Because they keep Bam lower, the high post is generally more open. I think the Heat will play zone, and I think they'll play it in Game 1. I think they're going to play it right away and see how the Lakers respond to it. The Lakers were a good zone offensive team this year, and LeBron's and Anthony Davis scoring and playmaking out of the high post can give the Heat zone a lot of problems. And of course, the Lakers' strength being offensive rebounding, and one of the weaknesses of zones are offensive rebounds. So it'll be interesting to see how the Heat approach it with zone and how the Lakers counter that zone. Thank you so much for watching this breakdown. I'm looking forward to the 2020 NBA Finals. I hope you are too. I cannot wait to do more.